Good morning, everyone. Just a few announcements before we introduce our esteemed panel. Most I have worked with, they're some of the best in the business. But just a couple of thank yous. Thank you to our sponsor, Mood. Mood is an online dispensary focusing on customers and high quality products. There are some financial and some savings from Financial Poise if you decide to shop at Mood. So thank you, Mood. Also, Type to Learn, kindergarten through 12th grade, learning and education. And also thank you to Max Assets. So appreciate your sponsorships for this seminar. We have a disclaimer. This is only for informational purposes. As an attorney, this is not legal advice. I think Jean will say that and Adam will say that. And Brenda, she is a professor and we'll talk about her shortly. So meet the faculty. Who are we? So Adam, do you want to do a quick hello to the audience?
Sure. Very briefly, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing since 2006, 2007. I practice mainly in the Northeast, although I've handled cases throughout the country. Previously founded a hemp and cannabis group at a national law firm. And I've been involved in the cannabis industry from a litigation standpoint and speaker standpoint since about 2018, 17. And I've worked with Melissa on multiple occasions, and we presented on multiple occasions together. So that's my background briefly.
I think we met in 2017.
I think so, at maybe DRI in Chicago or something. Yeah.
So awesome. Thank you, Adam. Brenda, my good friend Brenda. Hi.
Hi. I'm Dr. Brenda Wells. I'm a professor of risk management and insurance at East Carolina University. About 12 or 13 years ago, it occurred to me that the insurance industry was not properly prepared for cannabis legalization. So I wrote a paper on it, and it kind of took on a life of its own. So I have sort of become a thought leader in this space. And I met Melissa 10 years ago at a DRI cannabis law seminar, and we've also presented together several times, and we've had a real good run, and I'm very honored to be a part of this panel. So thank you for inviting me, Melissa.
Yeah, fun story that Brenda and I were in Boulder, Colorado, and the Dalai Lama was there. So I had the choice of hearing the Dalai Lama or Brenda Wells. I chose Brenda Wells. Well, that's right. Yeah. So it's a true story. Dalai Lama was there.
Thank you.
All right. A new friend and a new acquaintance now that I get to work with is Jean. Jean, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a cannabis industry attorney. I'm actually from Colorado. I spend half my time in Colorado, and I also live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I've been practicing since the beginning of the regulated industry in marijuana, starting in Colorado in 2012. And essentially everything related to businesses for cannabis entities, including a huge amount of regulatory law, administrative law, litigation, appeals, etc., all of the common vein of a regular business, but with the strict regulatory components pertaining to marijuana specifically, and then obviously hemp, which obviously is not regulated. So everything and anything you could imagine in the cannabis space, I kind of delve into, especially the regulatory component on the state side.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean. And then me. Been around since 2016. Doing cannabis work, hemp work. I focus primarily on product liability, premises, employment consultation, giving a lot of presentations, sit as panel counsel for a couple of different insurance companies, and just all in all available to answer questions if you have them. So we're always happy. You have our emails here to answer questions, do introductions, and try to do what we can for our audience. So we have a 4-part cannabis series. This is part 1 of the 4. This one is just a really 40,000 foot overview of what is cannabis, what is hemp, what is marijuana, where are we at? My goal is for this to be very podcast style with Adam, Jean, and Brenda, just talking about what's going on. And I'll start off with where are we? So here is a map with as of September 2nd, just a couple of days old, on where the US is and also some of our territories on legalization. So if you're looking at the dark green, we have 24 states plus the District of Columbia who are fully legal. That means it is recreational, it is medicinal, we've got the CBD. They have almost half the country now has legalized marijuana in every form. Medicinally, we're at 41 states, 41 out of 50, plus again, the District of Columbia. So I think Brenda and Adam and Jean, when I started in 2016, I think we were at probably 6 states. So we've seen huge growth in less than 10 years.
Mhm.
So bringing it over to the panel, the term cannabis is a very, very general term. And so what's the difference between hemp, cannabis, marijuana, especially looking at Brenda when it comes to insurance and policies and regulations and what are you insuring for? Does anyone want to take up this question? What are the difference between these different terms?
I can go ahead and explain it if you'd like. In the 2018 Farm Bill, essentially, hemp was made legal, and that's by definition. So essentially, under the Farm Bill, on a dry weight basis, a cannabis that on a dry weight basis, less than 0.3% delta-9 THC is considered to be hemp. Unfortunately, it's kind of delved into a system now where a lot of people have utilized those loopholes because the dry weight basis is actually the way they measure the delta-9 THC, which has caused a huge market of intoxicating hemp, which is in a very, very gray area. And that's why you're seeing states routinely ban those types of products, because the hemp products that you're seeing in the market are not regulated. And there's no required testing for these products. Now, there are some responsible companies that do the right thing, but not everyone, right? So marijuana, on the other hand, is everything outside of that definition that is intoxicating. And obviously delta-9 is the most intoxicating cannabinoid in the cannabis plant. In Colorado specifically is a perfect example of they have banned intoxicating hemp products from their market. It has been that way forever. And obviously, but Colorado and Washington were the first states with a regulatory program for marijuana. So that's the major difference. And they're very vastly different things, right? I live in North Carolina half the time, and we see intoxicating hemp products because of this loophole, but there's no legalized marijuana program versus Colorado. There's no intoxicating hemp, but there's a full-fledged, long-standing original regulatory system for marijuana.
Yeah. So Jean, if I had a hemp plant and a marijuana plant, both in front of you, visually, is there any way to tell any difference?
The hemp plants are a little bit skinnier. They're grown outside, so you can kind of tell, but not really. Like if you're a police officer and you pull somebody over and they have a bunch of plants in the back of their truck, they're going to have to go and test it to find out exactly what it is. It's not something that is completely obvious. And I only say that they look skinnier because they're grown outside, especially in Colorado. It's very dry and it's kind of a different environment, but that's really the only thing to my eye that I've ever seen the difference of, but it really comes down to that testing that's very important.
Right. So Brenda, I want to ask you, looking at the world of insurance and risk, what's the big difference if we use these terms interchangeably? What if we use marijuana and hemp and cannabis and don't really care which word we choose? Does that have any impact?
I think it does. It's funny that hemp is considered safe by the Farm Bill and it's legal by the Farm Bill, but they're not regulating hemp except on a state-by-state basis. Like I'm also, Jean, in North Carolina, and I've been to a hemp farm here. And you know, they are tested. If the crop goes hot, if it comes out more than 0.3% by dry weight, they have to destroy the entire crop. But there's really nobody regulating what you do with it after that. And so hemp is different than cannabis, and insurance policies are very specifically worded. So if they say cannabis, they mean cannabis. They do not mean hemp. And so it is important to make this distinction.
Adam, anything to add, and especially with the outlook of where we are with the Farm Bill?
I mean, the Farm Bill itself, it actually expired last year and they extended it to September 30th of this year. And as of now, it's stalled. They haven't actually done more with it. So in what, 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, the Farm Bill is going to cease to exist unless they do something, which will throw everything into chaos. You know, pick a doomsday scenario. Can you, if that happens, is hemp legal anymore? Can you transport it across state lines like they can now? I mean, I don't know. And with everything else with hemp and people, just as Brenda said, they consider it safe, but we're still discovering new cannabinoids every day, like Delta-9, right? And so is that going to show up in hemp? And what's the psychoactive effects of that? And people buy hemp-derived CBD thinking it's safe. And, there's just a lot between hemp and cannabis, and then the Farm Bill expiring. There's going to be a lot.
Yeah. And with this being an election year and everything being focused on that, is anyone paying any attention on extending that Farm Bill and figuring out what's going to happen in 3 weeks? Or we just...
I would think so. I know the Department of Ag has been talking about it, and there is the Mary Miller amendment that the House passed to actually fix this definition. So it's no longer this giant loophole, and actually changing it to total THC, which does make more sense because THC is the intoxicant. But I think that they have bigger problems outside of the hemp portion of the world. It really kind of comes down to, they have a lot of that's a huge bill. There's a lot of different components. And this is kind of, for them, kind of a non-issue. They don't want to be involved. The Department of Ag doesn't want to be involved in intoxicating people, frankly. But I think that it is stalled, and people have been watching it. But Adam's right. If they don't do something, who knows what's going to happen? It's a little bit up in the air, but I assume that they're going to do something. I hope it's the Mary Miller amendment and it sticks and they can clarify things for everybody.
I'm going to go on to the next question, but y'all brought up transporting across state lines. And so, for instance, I'm in Washington State, Oregon is legal. Could I send some marijuana over to legal? Both states say it's okay. Where are we at with transportation?
Well, that brings up other questions, right? All of this is federally illegal, but Colorado has the same kind of system where you can send genetic material across state lines as long as the other state is able to take it. And it comes down to the seed to sale systems as well. Metric is the major seed to sale system. Making sure that everything is connected that way. I've never had a client actually try to do it and move genetic material from Colorado to another state, and they've never taken anything from Washington. I think people are still a little scared, to be honest. But frankly, the states are now slowly delving into that world. But I also think that in Washington and Oregon and Colorado, the genetics have been there for so long, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go ahead and do that. But the states that are coming up, there's this idea of like immaculate conception. Where's the marijuana coming from? And all the states that started, it's a seed to sale system, right? So where is it coming from? No one really asks that at the beginning of the regulatory systems. It just kind of appears, and then it's in the system, and then, et cetera. But I think people are a little wary, but technically I don't know if the federal government would step in at that point, because that would be a concern where, the states are kind of like throwing up the flag a little bit in their face a little too much, but I'm not. My clients prefer not to get involved in that portion of things.
I might actually disagree a little. I remember there was a case, I think it was someone in Minnesota trying to transport cannabis oil or an oil across state lines, and that resulted in some arrests. And I think New York requires it to be grown here, but they've changed our regs so many times, it's hard to necessarily keep up sometimes. But I don't know. I think it's one of those things. Transporting it across state lines is clearly, you know, been illegal, and nobody really does it, as you mentioned, Gene. I feel like that might be one, especially if you're crossing multiple states, like perhaps, as Melissa mentioned, right, Oregon to Washington, maybe not, right? But if you're transporting from, say, Colorado to, you know, Oregon or Washington State, or let's say, you know, pick another one, New York, right? And you drive through Idaho where it's fully illegal.
It's a bad frame, yeah.
So, you
Well,
know,
I'm not
or if
talking about finished products. I'm talking about
Okay.
clones and the genetic material. Now, obviously, finished products, no, there's absolutely no reason to ever do that. I'm talking about the clones and the genetic material. And clones are under, you know, every state has their own definition, but a plant under 15 inches is how Colorado defines it now. It used to be 8 inches, and most states kind of do the 8-inch. But yeah, finished product, absolutely not. No.
Fair enough.
Couple of these I think we touched on. Let's go to the fourth bullet point. So some states we talked about 24 fully legalized, 41 medicinal. How are we getting there? How are states even making these decisions? Is the governors making the decisions and legislative bodies? Big picture overview of how this is transpiring in the different states.
Well, there's a lot of voter initiatives. Like in Colorado, they have the most amended constitution in the country. And so in Colorado, it started with medical in like 2006, I think it was. We all got to vote. I think I voted for it. And then recreational, same thing. It's a constitutional amendment, went to the voters. And then the legislature obviously had to fill in all the holes and get the regulatory program built. Some states have just the legislature move forward. Right now, obviously, North Carolina has pending legislation for marijuana. They don't have the voter ballot initiatives, unfortunately. You know, Missouri also has a constitutional amendment. So it truly starts from the legislature or I believe the constitutional changes that the voters are voting on. Not just the governor being like, hey, today, this is what we're going to do. But you know, those are the two main actions that I've seen, either via the legislature, or it's going to be a constitutional amendment or something that's voted in by the voters for legalizing it, even without a constitutional amendment.
Brenda, what's going on with North Carolina?
Oh, that's funny. I don't know.
I do.
And I'll tell you why. There are there are vape shops all over and hemp shops all over. And they're advertising Delta 9 on signage, but that's not legal. And it just feels like it's kind of the old Wild West. Everybody's doing what they want to do. Nobody's policing it. Nobody's controlling it. And, you know, I had a friend a couple weeks ago, he texted me and he said, I tried a gummy last night and I got violently ill. Yeah. He said, I threw up like 8 times or something like that. And I thought, good grief. It turned out it was a 600 milligram gummy.
So just for our audience, what would be a normal milligram that you would take if you took one gummy?
5 or 10.
Exactly.
And everybody in his party took one and but one guy got sick. Yeah. And so I don't think, and I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now. I don't know what we're doing in North Carolina. Every year they try to pass medical marijuana here, and every year it fails. But if you study our legislature, we have some pretty weird things that happen here, not necessarily related to cannabis. But, you know, I would much rather somebody I love buy cannabis in a regulated state. And yeah, I know they can't bring it back over the state line, but I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, I would much rather somebody I love buy real cannabis from a real state that has really legalized it and is practicing good hygiene, industrial hygiene and safety standards, rather than this stuff that's here. And as I tell my students, because I do cover this in my insurance classes, and I tell them, you know, I don't think you should buy, if you're going to use hemp, I don't think you should buy it from a store that has Christmas lights in the windows. That's what's on every corner. You know, you don't know what you're getting. So I have concerns about what's going on here.
Well, perfect transition. Safety and medical use. What are the safety protocols that we're seeing in the cannabis industry? So we're hearing about what isn't safe, but what is making these products safe for consumption?
I'll take that, or I'll start. A few years ago, I got some friends of mine in the insurance business in Nevada set me up to go visit a processing facility. So, you know, I walk in and it was not at all what I expected. They made me dress from head to toe. I had a hairnet on. I looked great. A white industrial coverall thing, covers on my shoes. And, you know, everybody in there was safety conscious. They were trying, and they had an industrial kitchen. They were making candy. And I thought this was so funny. They were showing me trays of candy, and the guy says, "Do you want one?" And I went, "Dude, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I can't be eating candy at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." And he goes, "These are not infused. That would be illegal. We can't give away infused candy." And I went, "All right, I'll eat one." If it's not infused, I'll eat it. I found them to be very safety conscious. They were very concerned about doing the right thing, even though they knew I wasn't an inspector.
Yeah.
So I'm impressed with the safety in the regulated states that I've seen.
Adam, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things. I've spoken with a number of risk managers and people who have worked in big pharma and whatnot, and you know, they've mentioned the same things that Brenda mentioned, the highly regulated states and the good companies, if you will, are very conscious of this. His concern was always, you know, the states where it's not as highly regulated, you know, are corners getting cut here and there? You know, is someone using a pesticide or an herbicide that they shouldn't? You know, are they being conscious within their grow facilities, within their manufacturing facilities? So overall, I think the highly regulated states that have issued a certain number of licenses, and those licensees who know they can have inspectors come at any time, are pretty safety conscious. The concern is obviously, you know, those unlicensed shops and growers and facilities. Like, what are they doing? How are they doing it? And the problem is, as Brenda mentioned, is, you know, where's the product coming from? Like, I'm in New York, and if you walk through New York City right now, you can find, I mean, I think we've certainly issued a lot less than 500 licenses, and there are a lot more than 500 shops selling cannabis products just in New York City. So, you know, where's it coming from? What were the safety protocols? Were they doing it like Brenda's place that she had gone to? So I think in general, yeah, the licensed and regulated states and those companies are operating at a high level like you would see in a big pharma, but that's not everybody.
No, you know, and as a products attorney, you know, we've seen these pesticide lawsuits.
Yeah.
Equal 20, and
Yeah, exactly.
it basically turns into cyanide. So not a great combination. Yeah. All right. How does modern medicine view cannabis? And for me, you know, is this really an avenue for getting rid of the opioids and the opioid crisis? But are your doctors prescribing it? And what are the doctors saying? And what kind of liability do they have? And can they even talk about it with the federal being illegal under federal law?
So I actually have an interesting one on that. So back when we met for that DRI somewhere around 7, 8 years ago, one of the things I had done, I had found a case study, or a case, if you will, of a doctor in Massachusetts who recommended, because he can't prescribe it, but recommended the use of medical marijuana to a female patient who was pregnant because she had terrible nausea, morning sickness, but she was already a high level cannabis user and she could not be prescribed any opioids because of her condition. The doctor actually had his license suspended briefly, but then he defended the case, and ultimately the suspension was lifted because his protocols and the reasoning he gave for prescribing it, if you will, was valid. She could not take any sort of opioid medication at all. And because she was a longtime cannabis user, his opinion was she should be getting regulated and tested cannabis to assist with any pain, nausea that she has, rather than going to the black market, which she's been doing anyway for years and years. And this will make it safer and a better pregnancy for her. So I think some doctors are certainly using it. I don't think it's widespread yet. I think they're still going to opioids first, but I think that's just due to the lack of really research, long-term research. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at right now.
Jean and Brenda, anything to add?
Yeah, I have a very bad back. I had a bad injury when I was a kid, and I go to pain management. And I have a doctor who, and I'm in North Carolina where it's illegal. So he can't recommend it. He can't prescribe it, but he is one of several doctors that I've met over the years who say it should be legal. They want it legal. When it was first made illegal in, I think, what was that, 1937, the American Medical Association opposed it then they opposed the illegalization of it. The New England Journal of Medicine has written an editorial that it should be rescheduled, and that was 20 plus years ago. The modern medicine is generally in favor of it. In my limited experience, I think doctors view it as helpful and possibly safer than, an opioid. Go figure. But I've got a friend going through an organ transplant right now, and they're telling her that her use of cannabis may kick her off the transplant list because they don't want her using it. And she's like, but I'd rather do this than take OxyContin.
So scheduling and descheduling and rescheduling are terms that have come up for our audience. Would someone like to explain what is scheduling and where is marijuana on the scheduling? Jean, would you want to chat about that for a minute?
Yeah. So obviously the public comment period is now closed and the administrative hearings are starting on December 2nd. Pertaining to the rescheduling. And just remember, rescheduling does not make it federally legal. It merely turns it into a prescription drug, which for the market that is recreational, which is the vast majority of the market, right? That's a huge amount of money. It's not going to change anything by and large. The biggest benefit to my clients is 280E and the tax benefits from the 280E. Outside of that, frankly, when it comes to the commercialization and these businesses, that's what people are looking at. So the rescheduling hearings start on December 2nd. If you look at the notice, it does say, it goes day to day and there can be a recess in the middle of it. So, even from the beginning of this, and looking at the data from administrative processes like this, it takes about 12 to 18 months minimum to get these types of things handled. And then obviously there's a lot of people, I think that a lot of people are really waiting to see what happens with the election on some level. There's a lot of people that I speak with that believe that, one side of the house will actually just end up descheduling it, treating it like alcohol, calling it a day versus the rescheduling, et cetera. But there's still a very, very long path before that happens. And I think one of the biggest pieces of confusion is rescheduling will not make it legal. The banking is not going to get fixed. The loans are not going to get fixed. The bankruptcy portion of the world, that's slowly changing with precedent, but that's still not going to be an automatic, fix. The only real benefit outside of research, and you can do research now, but genuinely, like, for the people in the market, I mean, it's going to be 280E. And I do bring up the research component because I have been at conventions and I've talked to, you know, a lot of different people in the industry. And to be completely honest, people can do research right now, but they don't want to put the funds into it because, to be honest, it's treated like alcohol in the states where recreational is, and that is how it is handled. And that seems to be working for them. So pouring in millions and millions of dollars for research for something that could take 10 years to get a patent on is not going to be something, in my opinion, that you're going to see industry players be engaged with. This is truly, it's a business. It's a, you know, it's the most American product there is, though. Think about it. It's grown here and it's sold in the state where you're buying it. It's manufactured. I mean, it truly is. Outside of the cartridges that are coming from China, everything else about it is truly a state-specific product, all American. But so there's a long path still pertaining to rescheduling is the bottom line.
Dean, do you think the research might happen with big pharma to try and find a replacement for Oxy or things like that?
I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because they've had the ability under a bill that was passed in I think it was 2022 or 2020, to allow for research. The problem is because it's a plant and there's so many different dynamics pertaining to this plant, it's very hard for them to actually pinpoint and get to the FDA testing that can take 10 years. It's not a static situation, right? Like it's a plant, it's ever changing. And so that's why I don't think that big pharma is necessarily going to hop in it. I think that's more likely with the natural medicine, i.e. like psychedelics, et cetera. I think that's a little bit different potentially. And I do see big pharma hopping into that portion of the world more, but I really don't think that big pharma is going to expend a huge amount of money for something that can change, you know, per harvest, just like reduced testing allowance, which is part of the, you know, state programs. It's just, there's too many dynamics. And that's why I think that I just don't find it likely.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I'm sorry. I just real briefly, I have a friend who shall remain nameless in DC who is a lobbyist for a major trade association that has something to do with cannabis. And he assures me that big pharma is fighting this every step of the way. He assures me that big alcohol is fighting this every step of the way. And I think it comes down to this. I can substitute cannabis for OxyContin or Xanax or whatever, and I can grow it in my backyard. I can't grow Xanax. And they don't like that. They want me to keep buying Xanax. They want me to, I mean, I don't buy Xanax, but I know what it is. It's just the people who know what's going on tell me that big pharma is not on board with this, but you know, that's just what I've heard.
Before we move on to the next question.
I can see that. They don't want to get involved in it. It's too much. But alcohol makes sense. There's like supposedly, I don't know, you know, it's hard to tell from these surveys, but more people are using cannabis now than alcohol. So of course alcohol is like, about that. We're not super excited, but that just means that maybe they should expand their horizons and maybe, you know, get into cannabis a little bit. Who knows? But
they've tried that some. There's been some infused beverages.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Right, but that's not big alcohol. Those are, I mean, I work with clients who have those types of, because right now a lot of states will not let you mix real alcohol and the THC. Two different licenses, two different premises, like the entire full divide. It's interesting for sure. Yeah,
makes sense.
All right, so it's on schedule 1. It may get rescheduled. It may get descheduled. It's up in the air. We're following it, and we can talk about predictions at the end. I'll give you all an opportunity to give 2 or 3 predictions. So we touched on this about these Delta 8s, Delta 10s, etc. Why are these problematic, and what's happening? Adam, do you want to start off and give us?
I'll start, but I know Brenda's got a lot on this, so I'll let it. So Delta 9, right? It's just one of the chemicals, one of the cannabinoids, for example, and it's intoxicating. And Delta 9 is one of the other intoxicating cannabinoids. Typically speaking, you would not find Delta 8, right, or a very high level of Delta 8 in hemp derived products and CBD products. might find a tiny bit, but it's usually so minor that it doesn't have a psychoactive effect. Whereas they are starting to discover Delta 9 in Canada, in hemp and CBD products, perhaps. And so that's a concern because people think they're buying one thing and then all of a sudden they're getting something that is much different. And they're constantly discovering new cannabinoids and how they interact with our body. So it is something that needs to be looked at and really researched, at least on that level, because you want to create a safe product. But right now, there's a lot of things that perhaps aren't safe. But I'll let Brenda expand on that. I know we were discussing this earlier. So
Yeah, before I let Brenda go, what's a cannabinoid? So what is that for our audience?
it's just one of the the various chemicals that affect the body in various ways, and they're throughout the cannabis and hemp plant. So
And there's
it would
hundreds.
affect our cannabinoid system. Yeah, and so it's just one of the things that we've defined within the cannabis and hemp plants.
Brenda.
The human body, in 1988, we discovered that there is an endocannabinoid system in the human body. Your body makes cannabinoids and responds to them. There's an entire medical journal called the Journal of the Endocannabinoid System. So we know that these things, I don't know that I'm going to say they fit, but they're compatible with the human body. The cannabinoids, I've heard different numbers. I've heard there's over 130 different ones that we've discovered. But, it's all the chemicals that are in the cannabis and hemp plants. So Delta 8 and Delta 10, since the Controlled Substances Act prohibits Delta 9, right? And cannabis in that sense, we take hemp and we use chemicals and solvents and processes to pull out something else that will get you high. So Delta 8 is about half the strength of Delta 9, and I've heard the same about Delta 10, THCO. They're pulling these things out of the hemp plant and going, ha, we can get high. We don't need cannabis. We can do it with hemp, and we can sell it, and it's going to be legal, and nobody's going to bother us. But again, it's unregulated. There's no safety protocol in place for these substances. And you remember a few years ago, there was a vape crisis. Some kids died buying off-brand, untested vape cartridges that had, what was it, vitamin E acetate in it or something like that.
Yeah.
So I have lots of concerns about these things. As I said, I think from a safety standpoint, these things are not necessarily safe because you don't know how they were processed and made.
Yeah, I had the one and only lawsuit regarding the vaping, the THC products.
Yeah.
Lawsuit.
Jean, anything to add?
No, I disagree. I just, it's a shame that some of these hemp industry players have kind of exploited this loophole, and it's not good for anybody, frankly. It is what it is, but hopefully the Farm Bill fixes it. Well, we shall see. States are slowly taking care of these problems, or at least trying to.
Another great segue to regulations. Yeah, we are tracking here, everyone. Nicely done. All right. What problems do you see with regulating plants, like things cut off in cannabis? What kind of problems are we seeing?
So one of the biggest problems is testing. It's very, very cumbersome. Every state's a little bit different. There's like kind of a thought process. So in Colorado, there's a robust testing. It's very expensive for these companies to do it as well. So there's pesticide, microbials, aspergillus, water testing. I mean, you name it, they're testing for it. And it can get really, really expensive. And while I appreciate they're doing it for public safety, that makes perfect sense. But some of the testing protocols are a little bit redundant. And every state is a little bit different. If you grow something in Maryland versus growing it in Colorado, they're totally different things. They're different ecological places. And so every state really needs to look at and get the good scientists for their respective states to make sure that testing is, actually meeting all of the requirements for what they're looking for, and even changing some of the understandings pertaining to aspergillus. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but in Oregon, there was a huge case pertaining to the aspergillus testing. And so it was a zero tolerance policy that was like way over the top. So that's been stayed. But in Colorado, they still have aspergillus. Aspergillus is everywhere. So it's one of those things where you ask scientists, how should this be handled? And they need to be answering these questions for the legislatures, not just the legislatures coming up with things. So that's one of the biggest problems. And then these companies spend a huge amount of money on everything imaginable, from the security systems that are involved and the licensing that is involved. I mean, the amount of licensing fees and the protocols that are required for the standard operating procedures that all of these companies need. It's really, really expensive to run a legitimate, licensed, regulated business. And the plant itself is also difficult. They require huge amounts of space, huge amounts of energy, unless you have a greenhouse or you're doing it outdoors, huge amounts of water. I mean, it's just, these are very expensive businesses. And that's, unfortunately, in the west part of the country, you see a lot of people trying to cut corners and then hurting people because they're taking it and selling on the black market, trying to do it under the radar, even though it's seed to sale. There's a lot of things that go on that the regulators try to catch, but there's only so much you can do if people are unfortunately desperate because of how much it costs to be in this business.
Yeah.
And you can,
Go ahead, Brenda.
I'm sorry, you can, what if I told you you could go out in the garden and take a tomato leaf and roll it up and smoke it and you would get high? Okay. Would we suddenly outlaw tomato plants? No, we wouldn't, because we'd find some way to grow it slightly different so that it was not a tomato plant anymore. We'd make up a new thing. And that's what they're doing with these novel cannabinoids. Is fine, you don't want to let us have cannabis, we've got hemp, we'll just find a way to get high from hemp and to have the psychoactive chemicals pulled out of it. And so I think regulating any plant is difficult. I mean, it's almost impossible, because you change one molecule, one gene, and it's not the same plant. So now do we outlaw the next wave of these plants? I just think it's very hard to regulate any plant.
Because I sit as panel counsel for a couple insurance companies, and they really are not interested in insuring laboratories. There is a lot of inconsistencies. There are background issues. There is a shortage of laboratories.
Yep.
Not getting consistent results. And if you get the wrong thing from the lab, your design is wrong, your warning is wrong, your product is wrong, and it all starts there. So it's incredibly problematic for the labs, because we want them, we want consistency, we want regulatory oversight to some degree for safety, but we have a real problem with laboratories.
We have a practical problem too. There's a shortage. I mean, if you really think about it, like you mentioned that New York, for example, is a huge state. Everyone always thinks of New York City, but New York is a monstrously big state. We have 16 labs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
That's just it.
That's it. We have 16 licensed labs. That's not enough. And for places like California, Colorado, right? They've had long-standing cannabis programs. Do they have enough labs? I don't know offhand,
They don't.
right? So there you go. Right? I mean, having those properly regulated, laboratories is essential for all the reasons we've discussed previously, and there's not enough of them.
No, there isn't. I think that's a cornerstone of everything. Starts with the foundational problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think here, if you look at the product liability, like
Oh God, yeah. That's one of the things you and I always counsel people on, is the product stuff. So
absolutely, that's one of the cornerstone issues. All right, I know we have 15 minutes and we have 8 more questions. Let's go. I think we've talked a lot about hemp here. Let's move on. Let's talk about employment for our next 10 minutes, and then we'll do our predictions. Employment. Lots of our viewers are going to be business owners. So what can they do? Just kind of big overview. Are we still seeing zero tolerance policies? Are they allowed by employers to employees? What are people seeing nationwide?
Some states are very clear that you're not going to be protected. It's up to your employer, frankly, and there's no way to test if it's THC from legal hemp versus marijuana. There's no way for anybody to figure that out. I think New Jersey was one state where they're actually allowing employers or not allowing employers to discriminate. I'm not sure. That would be more of an Adam area, but all the states that I've ever seen, including Colorado, still has the rule that if your employer says no, it doesn't matter if it's medicinal or recreational, it's a no-go, and that's the end of it. So there's no protections on the employment front.
I'm seeing it differently, Jean. And I'm seeing really there was a couple different cases, and the states came down differently, which I found interesting. One was in Massachusetts, one was in Arizona. Arizona found that there could not be a zero tolerance policy for, it was basically a checker. She wasn't in a place where there was public safety issues, like a forklift driver or, a commercial airplane pilot, something along those lines, where I think you see zero tolerance being permitted. But if you're a checker at a grocery store and you have a medicinal card, I don't think you can have that zero tolerance policy. So I think it's much more gray, and I think some of the courts are coming down that way. I also think it depends on if you're getting federal funding, right?
Yeah.
No,
I
Nevada.
know.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
No, I was going to say, like, Connecticut, New York, those states have found, again, certain employment can be, barred from using it, police officers, EMTs, things like that. One that people generally forget are actually truck drivers. I've seen too many cases. There's one in New York. It may still be pending. I haven't checked on it in a little bit. It's called Hornby Medical Marijuana. He was a truck driver who researched the crap actually out of a product he was going to get. It was a CBD oil and gummy, took it. He popped positive on a, mandatory federal drug test because they're all federally regulated, all truck drivers. And he was immediately fired. And he brought a host of claims. Most of them ended up being dismissed for various reasons. I'm not sure what's still pending. I was actually talking to the lawyer handling the defense of it. But that's an interesting one. I know there was a case in Oregon years ago. I don't know if it's still good law. Emerald Steel. It was a guy had a medical condition and he had a medical marijuana card, and his employer refused to grant him an accommodation, and the court ultimately said they didn't have to. Last I had checked, which was about a year ago, it was still good law. Now, I don't practice in Oregon every day, so I don't know if it still is, or if Melissa. I mean, it's in your territory, generally speaking.
It is. What I advise when people are coming to me for policy and procedure manuals, I recommend a hierarchy system, and it depends on what the responsibilities and duties are for that employee if you have a medicinally acceptable state. So recreational, I don't think is protected by the employer, but if you have a medicinal card and you're getting it and you're not coming impaired to work, and yes, Jean is correct, impairment is very hard to determine. There are impairment THC breathalyzers, but they are still in the beginning stages, and they cost about $8,000 for one. And I would love to see that in the court system. That'd be a fun motion in limine on getting that excluded. But it's hard. But if you have an employee and they have a card and they're not in a role of something that is safety to other employees or the public, then I think you have to accommodate them.
It varies with the state. Now I'm not a lawyer. I've already said that, but the last time I looked at this, you're right. There's no protections for recreational use, none. But like, I know Nevada and Massachusetts have kind of said, yeah, you got to reasonably accommodate that. But Colorado in Coates versus Dish Network, that man had a horrible physical impairment that cannabis helped him with. And he wasn't interfering with his job. And the Colorado Supreme Court said, you can fire him because you have a zero tolerance policy. So it kind of, it's varying with the courts across the states, and you're never really sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I'm seeing if states go the other direction and blue states go a different way. It's just been very curious.
California only just passed the law, what, 9 months ago? It was, I remember looking it up. It was California statute. I'm looking at it right now. AB 2188. It prohibited employers from discriminating against a worker based on their off-the-job use of cannabis. Prior to it, you could fire them, which when I remember reading that and learning that for an earlier article I've written, I was blown away, just because that would be the last thing you would think California would do.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. So, in I guess the sweet C and the upward tiers of corporations and businesses, what kind of protocols are we seeing about use of cannabis? And are we seeing any kind of mandatory testing when you're kind of outside of the assembly line, commercial pilots, truck drivers, etc.? Does anyone see anything along those lines?
No. I think it's like you mentioned, right? It's more if someone's showing up to work, regardless of their job, like they went on a 4-day bender at a bar, right? Then you're gonna have conversations, right? But I mean, but if someone's using cannabis at home and they're showing up to work completely normal in the sense of, right, you're not stumbling, you don't whatever, then no, I haven't seen it.
I haven't either.
The most lawsuits I'm seeing is actually not about medicinal use and you having your card and your employer terminating you for that. It is people using what they believe is a non-THC product, a hemp product or a gummy, and it is advertised as such. And they bought it at the gas station when they thought they would grab their Cheetos, and they grab this whatever gummy sitting there. And that's a good idea. And lo and behold, they're testing positive and they get terminated, even though in good faith, they did not believe they were taking a product with THC.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's what happened with Horn.
Yeah, I've seen a few dozen of those lawsuits.
Yep.
And yeah, they're coming out. First of all, though, you get this lawsuit. Who are you suing, right? Where are you getting? So where is that company and how are you getting to them? I think that's problematic.
Yeah, I think it's the ones I've seen and the cases I've seen are just employers coming up with testing protocols, observable signs of impairment during hours. You can the problem with testing, as we just discussed, is, if you test someone for alcohol, right? You do a breathalyzer, or God forbid, you really had to do like a blood test, right? You're getting a pretty good indication of when they last consumed alcohol. There's no test that I'm aware of that can show, oh yeah, Adam consumed cannabis 2 hours ago.
Yeah,
but
in your system for 30 days.
Yeah.
Right? THC will show in your system. It's like the craziest thing. Cocaine, I think, is like 3. Not that I'm advocating for cocaine, but it's just like a little ironic. I had someone call me one time, I'm using these THCs, and I was like, I can show you what you're doing is legal, but you're gonna have to explain that to your employer, and you're gonna, this is the law, and you aren't protected. Make sure you understand these things before you use them, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, I wish they would kind of figure out this testing, just like Adam said. And now there's a breathalyzer, but it's apparently very, very expensive, and that's brand new. And just like you said, what's going to happen in the court system? That's going to be fun to watch.
And even if they pop positive for THC and you have to disregard those results,
right?
I mean, Gene, myself, you, Melissa, right? We're lawyers, right? I see people kind of like what they're doing, as Brenda mentioned, with getting a loophole to get around, oh, you can't have Delta-9 in hemp? Well, we'll go make something else. Well, employers are like, oh, Adam's a problem employee. Well, we can't use the THC positive test, but maybe we'll find something else now.
Yeah.
Everything tests different. Like a hair follicle is going to test much longer for positivity than your saliva test or your blood test.
The urine test is the problem, because it tests for marijuana metabolites.
Mhm.
And like Jean said, it stays in your system. It can stay in your system for 30 days. I've heard as long as 45. So it might be that you went to, I don't know, a Doobie Brothers concert and everybody was smoking a doobie and you took 1 or 2 hits of it. It could stay in your system a very long time, even though a week later you're not intoxicated at all or impaired. So the urine blood test, you remember that toxicologist, Melissa, that first year when we met, you know, she was saying the police, if they want to test for impairment, they've got to get them to a blood test fast.
Within 20 minutes at that point. So, all right, we have 4 minutes left. I couldn't have done a better job. Look at this. 4 minutes predictions. All right, I'm gonna go with you, Adam. Any predictions? Anything you want to share? What do you think is gonna happen?
I think there'll be more chaos before we get anything settled. I mean, just seeing what New York has gone through. I mean, I have clients who are legitimately waiting on their growing license, their cultivation license, and you look at the pending order of applicants, and there's no rhyme or reason as to why they chose this person and then they moved to this person and then they moved to this company. The rescheduling, descheduling. I think we are going to continue to have more chaos before we get anything settled. I thought, back in 2017, 2018, we were about 4 years away from federal legalization, and I'm actually amazed, given what's gone on with the states, that we don't have it. I mean, realistic, I'm just amazed. So I think there's just going to be more chaos, more uncertainty, and it'll continue to grow slowly. My hope is that by the time I retire in roughly 20 years, we'll have something that's settled. But that's my best guess, is just unfortunately a little bit more chaos.
Yeah. Brenda.
I completely agree with Adam. This is going to probably get worse before it gets better. And also, I predicted that Obama would legalize it. And then I predicted that Trump would legalize it. And I predicted that Biden would legalize it. So I don't make predictions anymore.
Well, you're scoring a perfect score.
I was 100% wrong. So,
you know what? Go big or go home. That's right. Jean?
Yeah, I think it's been chaos since I started in 2012, right? Like, it's always been this dream. In the first 5 years, nothing was happening, and then slowly but surely things were happening, and everybody gets really excited about the Safe Banking Act, and that's not gone anywhere. I mean, that seems like the easiest thing to touch, right? Like, it's pretty innocuous, but there's just constant chaos. I think the rescheduling is going to be held up because people like to hold things up, and it's going to make the attorneys money, but it's really not going to move the ball forward. I do think that if Trump is elected, I am actually in the position, there's a lot of attorneys that I work with that kind of agree that he's probably most likely going to deschedule it and send it back to the states. I kind of think that's what's going to happen. And the reason I say that is because he has this kind of state's view of things. That's how he wants to handle abortion and those types of issues. And he's not worried about getting reelected because, that would be the end of it. So I'm kind of hopeful that happens, but I think it's still chaos, and it's going to be another at least 2 years, even with rescheduling, because of all of the lawsuits that are going to be popping up all over the place. I don't know if you guys watched any of the rescheduling comments, but yeah, there's people all over just kind of throwing fits, and it is what it is. If they could at least start with the Safe Banking Act, that would be cool. Something.
Would have been easy, yeah. But hey,
yeah, the low-hanging fruit we can't even get at this point. So
nope.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. For our audience, our next presentation will be on insurance and risk and trying to protect your businesses. Then we go on to a financial platform. We'll talk about banking. We'll talk about protecting assets. We'll talk about valuation of businesses. So we have some great programming coming on down the line. So Adam, Brenda, Jean, you are all I could have hoped for panelists. So thank you so very much for joining me, joining Financial Poise, and giving us your expertise. I appreciate it.